What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Muscle Memoirs Podcast. As always, I am joined by Mike Murray through the screen, and today we have on Austin Stout. Austin, how you doing today, man? It's great to have you on.
I'm good. Thanks for having me, guys.
Of course, of course. So, Austin, you're a certified strength and conditioning coach, and one of the main reasons we're having you on today is that you've coached plenty of physique and bodybuilding competitors from the amateur to pro level. And it's through your business, Integrated Muscle and Strength. And aside from that kind of just little brushing over the surface there, can you give our listener just a little more background of who you are and maybe your education going into coaching and what you do now?
Sure. Yeah. So, I started like most people, right? I started weightlifting for sports, right? So, I was a wrestler in high school, wrestled up to a pretty high level. I knew that that's something I needed to integrate into my training to improve. So, it it just so happened that a lot of the information that I was finding was through bodybuilding resources, right? Because you kind of have science, but bodybuilders typically try everything before science really catches up to prove what's true and what's not, type of thing. So that's how I found it. And then so I went through that. I actually had a nutrition coach towards my end of my high school wrestling career, and he was somebody that had just started. I don't know if he just started, but he was pretty new into coaching bodybuilders and competitors and prepping people, because at that time there was no Instagram and there wasn't anything like there is now in terms of prep coaching. So I became interested in that. My job afterwards and my kind of career path took me away from wrestling. So I wanted to kind of point that towards bodybuilding. So I actually started competing as a teen. I think 19 was my first show. And then I started, like a lot of people, I started personal training one-on-one with people in the gym. And that kind of turned into, oh, wait, I can also help people online. And it wasn't really a thing at the time. Like, there wasn't a lot of people making a career out of it at the time. It was starting to become more popular. And then I started realizing that I'm pretty good at this. I had a psychology background too in school. I minored in psych in college. I'm like, well, I can communicate with people pretty good. So I can do this whole, online thing. And then that's what it turned into. So my call for college, I actually was going to go for nursing or PT, something like that, medical field. And the schools around here that were good had a long waiting list. It was hard to get into them. And I really didn't want to just sit and take classes for 2 years to stay active on the waiting list, just because. And I started to realize I could, make money at coaching people. So I ended up with a BS in nutrition instead, which is, for what we do, you can argue whether or not a degree is really even anything. It's kind of up to the person. It looks good, right? There's a lot of successful coaches that have them. There's some that don't. We have people with PhDs in the industry that are very educated. It's just kind of depends. So that's where I ended up. It just built from there. I've learned how to. I'm by no means a marketing or social media expert, but I learned how to put out content, and I still do it all the time, constantly. Kind of grew things organically. There was never, like, I know now someone could become a coach and probably get a full client load within a year if they really knew how to market themselves. It took me 6 or 7 or 8 or whatever, to finally get bigger to where I am now. I'm still not the biggest, obviously, but that's kind of where I'm at. I competed throughout that time, and now we're 2020. So, yeah.
Awesome, man. Well, we're super excited to talk to you today and kind of get into the topics and kind of see where your knowledge takes us today. So
Cool.
This episode's kind of a follow-up on a little series we're doing on maximizing the off-season for bodybuilders. And in order for a bodybuilder to maximize their off-season, it seems prudent that they're going to have extended off-seasons multiple years in duration, and then how they should structure this to put on the most amount of muscle may vary substantially. So kind of getting right into our first topic here today, we want to get kind of your off-season body weight recommendations for bodybuilders, and if you have kind of a general percentage over a stage weight that they're targeting for your athletes, or if you have, hard cutoffs. So if you don't want your athlete to surpass an X number of pounds or percentage of body fat, anything like that come to mind?
Okay, couple things I'm going to consider. So I know when we originally emailed, you guys probably had seen stuff I put out, and it varied a little bit. But my disclaimer is everything depends. So that's always so. Like when I'm on these podcasts, I kind of like to give just a little bit of context before I answer anything. So there are a couple ways you can think about it. A beginner versus an advanced person might be a little bit different. I actually did I do these whiteboard videos for my YouTube. I just talk about different topics and stuff. And I did one the other day on calorie surplus, like how much, how fast should you gain weight, or how much maintenance should you eat, yada, yada, yada. But generally, I'll find that as someone becomes more advanced, the amount of weight that they're probably going to gain in off season and the amount of surplus that they're probably going to need is probably a little bit less, just because it does become harder to gain muscle. Like a newbie, if I go 1,000 calories over maintenance, they might take 800 of those calories and synthesize new tissue, right? Whereas in an advanced person, they're closer to their ceiling. We know that they're not going to gain muscle as fast. So there's no reason for me to just gorge them with food, because you just know that genetically they're probably not going to, utilize all that food and just gain 100% muscle. So that's just like a real general statement. But then of course you get into metabolism of the person and how they partition nutrients. Are they closer post show? They're obviously going to partition a little bit better, probably, versus later in the off season. As far as weights go, I mean, in general, I'm going to look at where's a person's body function optimally at. So I want to look at performance in the gym too, right? So everyone kind of has that. I always like this. I'll ask someone, so what would you look like if you just weight trained casually and you ate around maintenance calories? Like, what would your body fat be? And if they're a little bit on the thicker side, that's probably where their body's kind of at that homeostatic set point. Like all their hormones are going to be normal, their hunger signals are going to be normal, their sleep will be normal, their training's good, so on and so forth. That's probably where that person's going to sit body fat wise in the off season and feel good and be able to, progress in the gym. If I try to keep them too lean, it might just deter performance. Or if we go too fat, then obviously we got to just get that fat off later. So what I kind of notice is, and a lot of people have seen this, they'll go post show, right? They fill up with glycogen and water and everything, and then all of a sudden they spill over, and all of a sudden they're like, where did that fat come from? And they gain. It seems that some people will gain fat quicker initially, right? Your body's trying to reach homeostasis again, and it obviously depends on how you're eating, but once you kind of hit that, and I noticed this myself, once I kind of hit that body fat set point, I can keep gaining weight slowly and the body fat will be kind of minimal. But I initially gain fat kind of quick because my body's like, hey, we want to get back to, your body's very smart. It will partition into the adipose tissue if it wants to fill it back up. You can only be so selective, So my answer would be, I'm going to try to keep people in a zone that they perform well and are comfortable and are also still partitioning nutrients well. Visibly in a photo, if I'm looking over weeks and they've gained 5 pounds and it looks like they just gained 5 pounds of fat, it's too much, right? I still want a good ratio of lean tissue to fat gain. And then that's really what determines how far we go in off season. And obviously the person's goals matter. So if they want to jump a whole weight class, it's going to take a long time. And I might not get as concerned if they gain a tiny bit more fat over time if we're doing like a 3-year off season. You know what I mean? But that's some general stuff, I guess, towards that question.
Awesome. So moving on from that, Austin, I have watched a couple of your whiteboard chats. Haven't had the opportunity to watch your most recent one yet, but your thoughts on a variety of topics related to the theme for this podcast got me pretty interested in having you on. And obviously, you're a very intelligent guy, and that usually coincides with an answer of "it depends" for most questions. So I don't want to pigeonhole you here, but I do think you might be providing an alternate perspective to some of our recent guests on this topic. So in terms of the off season, how far is too far? And basically kind of what we're getting down to with this question is there a body fat percentage which, where insulin sensitivity is reduced, perhaps partitioning is worse, and that it is truly detrimental to get your body fat too high?
Yeah, it kind of going back to that last question, the answer would be when I start seeing more fat and muscle gain. And it's visible. Like if you've looked at enough photos as a coach, you're going to see it. Like you're going to see, and also what you'll start noticing is maybe visibly that person starts losing some of that pop in the muscle. Like the muscle isn't, post show when you eat, how you get that kind of super compensation look like you're blown up, right? Everything's going to the muscle tissue or most of it. When they start fading and it starts looking like, everything's kind of, they're getting more subcutaneous fat. Like they're just getting that softer look. Maybe they're losing pumps in the gym. That's a good indication. I mean, if you're eating 600 grams of carbs and you're not getting a pump in the gym, you know what I mean? Your partitioning is not very good, right? Because you have plenty of glycogen at that point. You should. So those are the kind of things that I'm looking at. And that's the kind of stuff that I'm asking the client. Now, I can't say 20% body fat is going to be the answer, but I will look at also what's the person's ability to lose fat like. So I'll give you an example. I have a couple guys right now that they eat a ton of food to get, to grow. I know that they lose fat. At least I've worked with them a lot. I can make them lose fat relatively easily because I just, I know how their body works. And am I going to worry if they gain a little bit of extra fat because they're both trying to jump weight classes? So we have big goals. Probably not. You know why? Because that little bit of extra fat and water gives them leverage in the gym and they get really strong and they gain, and they're gaining muscle. So unless they're not getting pumps in the gym and they can't reach down and tie their shoes because they're out of breath, then, I'm not gonna get too worried about it. And then also the question always comes up, well, like a natural versus enhanced athlete, is that a difference? And yes, it does to an extent. I mean, at the end of the day, thermodynamics, it's calorie surplus or calorie deficit, no matter how you slice it. But, certain hormonal environments might help you utilize more of those calories towards muscle gain, right? Versus it might help stave off some of that fat gain. But in general, it really just comes down to individuals. I mean, I've worked with people from both camps that just, that person that it seems like no matter what they eat, it turns into muscle. Like there are people like that. The only real difference between the two camps would be that obviously the genetic ceiling goes up when you add enhancements, right? So realistically, if I have an advanced person that's 40 years old and they're a natural bodybuilder, how much more muscle are they going to gain if they've been competing for 20 years, realistically? So am I going to push them 40 pounds over stage weight or 50 pounds? I mean, I don't really see the point in that. I mean, if they gain 2 pounds of muscle in the year, that would be amazing at that, being that advanced.
So going further on a couple of things you touched on there. So it seems like as far as how our physique is looking is probably the primary indicator here as far as, when it makes sense to turn back from that bulk. If you notice someone is consistently looking a little softer, you've been working with them for quite some time, you kind of have a feel for their physique, but their training performance is better than it's ever been. Are you concerned that, they're not looking too hot? Do you turn back? What do you do there?
So in a case like that, I might just hold, right? I might just hold around whatever their calories are. I have no problem. I think a lot of people get this idea of in order to be making any kind of progress, you got to be going up or going down, right? You have to be constantly creating surplus or constantly creating deficit. So I might just hold them at that maintenance level. Now, is there really any good hard science on holding phases? Not that I'm aware of. You know what I mean? But what I do know is the body does love homeostasis, right? That's what our body strives for. If you know anything about our feedback loops in terms of hormones, I mean, everything revolves around maintaining homeostatic balance, right? So in a case like that, I might not want to get away from a good thing. So I might just let them hold there. And some people, if you see people talk online, they say, well, if you hold there, you'll recomp at that weight, at that same weight. I personally don't see that much. It does not happen that much. I mean, it can happen. And again, natural versus enhanced will make a difference. But in general, I do find it useful for people to hold, because sometimes when you're eating a lot of food too, how much of that weight is muscle? How much of that weight's just water and being packed full of glycogen and intramuscular triglycerides and all that. So if I can hold there and make sure that they maintain good performance, if they don't gain any more fat, we might even push up a little bit more. But if I notice that I'm holding at that weight for 2 or 3 weeks and they're not increasing calories, but they're progressively getting softer, then we're probably going to pull back down. Being strong going into a calorie deficit is not the worst thing in the world either, right? It's like, gaining strength and continuing to gain strength in a deficit is always going to be a good thing. So that's kind of how I would look at that situation. I would tell people, just don't be afraid of doing a maintenance, staying around maintenance or maybe just slightly above. There's nothing wrong with that.
Can you elaborate a little bit further on the potential benefits of this holding phase? Because this is a topic we've discussed with other guests. It's kind of similar to this idea of gaintaining, right? So putting on muscle while, staying around maintenance calories, because you kind of just voiced there that you don't think there's this, huge recomposition effect or anything like that. And that's what many would report, is that as far as, the more advanced trainee, you're just not going to put on muscle and lose fat at the same time. So if nothing like that is occurring, can you tell us a little bit more about why these phases might have some benefits?
Yeah, the biggest thing I think is, and this is going to be, I would say this is more so for people that have gained a significant amount of weight in their off season, that are maybe these people that are trying to jump a weight class. What I tend to notice is if they can get more comfortable around that weight, they tend to maintain that muscle gain a little bit better when we come back down. If I'll give you an example. So if you typically are your normal off-season weight, you might come up to 200 pounds. Okay. If you notice that every off-season you can come up to about 200 pounds, you might be slightly better each time, maybe, but you're pretty comfortable around that weight, right? Well, now you want to jump a weight class. It's a long off season. You want to jump a weight class. Well, jumping weight classes, depending on the weight class, that's a minimum of, we're talking 5, 10, 15, 20 pounds. It doesn't, depending on where you're, at. You don't, and I can give you personal experience, because that's what I'm in the process of doing, is I hit my highest off season body weight that I had ever hit by at least probably 12 pounds. I was not comfortable with that weight. And it wasn't because I was fat. I was just not comfortable. You know what I mean? It wasn't like, maybe it was because, and it's not like I was 300 pounds. I mean, I was almost 245, but that's it was a lot of weight to carry around. It was a lot of food to eat. But what I've noticed is once I hit it, I couldn't possibly eat anymore. I was just so stuffed full of food. But I thought, well, I'm going to see if I can hold this for a few weeks or a month before I come back down. And what I noticed was my digestion and training performance actually improved by about week 2 or 3 without going up. My assumption is that my body just became, and this was more of an internal thing, I think it just became more efficient at assimilating and digesting that amount of food. My gastric juices may have increased production. Like I was just able to break that down. So is that necessarily a muscle growth thing? Not really. It's just more of a homeostatic thing, like I said. And then, of course, once I dropped back down, I was able to maintain that strength pretty good, and I didn't just drop 20 pounds of water. I will say that by about week 3 or 4, I did look a little bit better at that weight. So was that a recomp? I'm not really sure. Maybe it was less inflammation from the food I was eating because I was just assimilating it better. Because when you're eating, like I was eating upwards of 7,200 calories. I mean, it's a lot of food. So when you're consuming that amount of food, there's a lot of water and glycogen and electrolytes going in and out all the time. You're going, like, you're sitting on the toilet like 6 times a day, right? So what was that exactly? I'm not really sure, but I really boil it down to my body became more comfortable at that food intake, and I felt better and I performed better, and that benefited me personally when I started to come back down. If that makes sense. That's the best answer I can give you. I wouldn't tell someone, like, I know some people will put this. I don't like to give people false hope. I'm not going to sit here and tell someone that if you gain 40 pounds, and then you hold the 40 pounds that you're going to sit there and just recomp it, definitely, because that's ridiculous. Like, it's not, that's just not reality for most people, Can it happen? Sure. I do genuinely see it in some people, but like I said, I don't feel that is the majority. So
very, very cool. Yeah, I love that insight.
Yeah. Just more of a comfort thing, man. Just try to get comfortable with that new body weight. That's really what it is.
Cool. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Going back on some things we were talking about earlier, as far as these potential negative adaptations from body fat getting too high in the off season. When partitioning starts to worsen, we're likely looking at some sort of scenario where insulin sensitivity is significantly worse. Is this something we should be going out of our way to improve in order to potentiate further adaptations? And how can we potentially improve this as body fat gets higher? Is it simply a case of, hey, you need to lose some weight, or can we look towards nutritional approaches like carbohydrate cycling or maybe even supplementation?
Okay. This was a hot one. So I'm sure you guys remember when nutrient timing was like really came into the scene, right? I've done a million different things in regards to this question. The bottom line is sometimes you just have to come out of a calorie surplus. Like you can do different things. So I will notice trends. Like if I'm coaching someone, I'm going to notice trends in terms of what macronutrients they feel and run best on. Some people feel they're just glucose metabolizers. They feel better using higher carbohydrate, a low to moderate fat type of diet. That's what they get the best pumps on. That's what they feel the best. I'm going to stray away from what science might say in terms of how to distribute macronutrients. I'm going to look at what someone feels best on, because that's almost always going to yield the best result at the end of the day. So it might be a situation where you could do something like, if I have people that have been in a surplus for a long time, inevitably, here's the thing. You are going to become insulin resistant to some extent if you stay in a calorie surplus for a long period of time. Like, it's going to happen. You can't, because there's only so many places nutrients can go, right? You're not going to be able to stay in a surplus indefinitely. And the bigger that surplus is, probably the faster that's going to happen. So, we might do things like, I might even just initiate some type of macronutrient timing right off the bat. Now, do I base that on body composition or more so on how they feel? It's usually more so on how they feel, because I've done different things. Like, I know people will eat carbohydrates heavily around peri-workout window, pre, intra, post. I have people that we don't eat any pre-workout carbs because they just feel sluggish when they train. So we just don't do it. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But when we're solely talking about this insulin resistance type of issue, yeah, there's a million different glucose disposal agents, right? We can do things like that. Do they help? Yeah, I mean, a lot of them do have science behind it, right? They have actual literature behind them to show that they work. Now, they do different things. Some of them are more like insulin mimetics, where they'll mimic, the action of insulin. Others are, you take something like berberine, that's popular. That's a little bit more like, it's a little bit more like metformin in that it helps lower hepatic glucose output potentially. So, I mean, that's kind of like a different approach, right? So if you could use like a well-rounded glucose disposal agent that contained different mechanisms in there, and I think and some of them also help with actually keeping like the glucose or like the insulin receptor itself sensitized. You know what I mean? So it's never a bad idea. I mean, if someone's budget is super tight, am I going to include that? Probably not. But if they don't mind, absolutely. Well, I'll include it. And then secondary to that, we can do things like calorie cycling throughout the week. Sometimes if I throw days of fasting in there, it doesn't even have to be all day. It just kind of depends. That will help. I mean, what's going to be quicker? What's going to resensitize you quicker than not eating? It's like, you know what I mean? And there's really not anything that's going to resensitize you much quicker than just literally not eating any food. So, now, of course, if someone's calories are really high, it gets kind of tedious to throw in fasting because we're kind of like offsetting their surplus for the week, So maybe if I know they need to eat a lot, I might just put that in right from the beginning. So I know it's kind of in my head. It's already part of the process, right? For myself, I did that periodically throughout my really high calorie intake, is for not only for like digestive relief, but also if I notice blood sugars start creeping up, I would do like a 24-hour fast where I would maybe eat, let's say I ate at 9 p.m. one night, I would fast the whole next day and maybe have one meal the night before or the next night. You know what I mean? Would my blood glucose go down? Yep, it would. I mean, it would definitely go down temporarily. I mean, of course, by the next couple of weeks or so, I had to do it again. So did that mean I needed to eat more food the other times? Well, yeah, because I just subtracted 7,000 calories out of my surplus, but it seemed the benefit was better than the downside, I guess. So fasting works great. There's a million different ways to do it if you want to use that. Glucose disposal agents are fine. You can even do things like I've taken people where they're high carbohydrate eaters and worked into like a temporary ketogenic approach or something like that. And it can work. Some people indirectly will become insulin resistant on high fat intake. I mean, you look at like diabetic models, a lot of it is, there's a lot of stuff that, points towards high fat diets causing insulin resistance, right? So, I mean, that might or might not work. I just need to either know the person or try it. If I cycle carbohydrates, like we go higher on training days and lower on non-training days, maybe on those non-training days, we add a little bit more fat into the diet. I have people that works fantastic. And then others, I'm like, why is your blood glucose higher after non-training days on this higher fat intake? Then I pull the fat out, boom, blood glucose goes down. So of course, fat slows digestion, so there's delayed gastric emptying, and it'll inevitably it's going to keep blood glucose probably elevated a little bit higher. Maybe not as high of a spike, but it's going to keep it up a little bit higher potentially because just that food is digesting a little bit slower. So I know I'm like, there's a bunch of different directions there, but I think after you try those things, you may just have to go into a deficit. I don't think that I think when someone's too far gone, nothing's going to be going into a deficit. Now, how you approach a mini cut or whatever is a whole different, ball of wax. But those are kind of like the main scenarios that I see, I think. that makes sense.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Lots of tools there to play with, and ultimately it's going to come down to the individual and experimentation and seeing what works best for them, pretty much as you alluded to. Last question kind of in this segment before we go to mini cuts is, besides insulin resistance, is there anything else going on hormonally as body fat gets up there which may be contraindicated to maximizing muscle hypertrophy? Maybe just general chronic inflammation, stuff like that?
Yeah.
We can't really hear you with the mic.
Some background.
Yes, just some sort of background noise right now.
I don't think it's on mine right now.
Might be me. I think there's a train going by in the distance.
Is there a plane flying by your house?
It's a train. I have these train tracks that come by at the most convenient times.
I have train tracks in my house, so I understand. But yeah, so inflammation is probably the biggest one, right? Because inflammation, that was another one of the whiteboard videos I did, right? Because inflammation is such a hot button word right now, right? Because is it good? Is it bad? We know that acutely we need potentially inflammation as part of the muscle growth process, right? During training, like localized inflammation, at least like in the muscles you're training, and it's part of the whole cascade of immune response and everything. So when does inflammation become a bad thing is kind of what you have to think about. So beyond training, nutritionally, inflammation can absolutely become a bad thing when are we really designed to eat over a caloric maintenance all the time? No, we're not. It's just not how our body's designed. We have mechanisms in place to store things, right? We store in different areas, whether it's adipose or glycogen or whatever it is. And eventually, if you're just hammering your GI tract forever, you're going to have inflammation. So that's why, I see it. I see people that their stomach is like, you get like the kind of not fat stomach, but it's still blown out look stomach because they're eating so much food. And I know a lot of people will attribute this, like, especially in the enhanced crowd, they think it's like a PED thing, and it could be, but a lot of the time it's just that a lot of those really big guys eat a lot of food and they have poor abdominal control and they have a very high inflammation. Like there's markers, right? I can go in and look at lab work. If I take someone that's deep in an off-season phase and I look at lab work and I look at different inflammatory markers, they're probably elevated, and that could be like a lot of inflammatory markers, common ones like C-reactive proteins, one that people look at. That's within the actual vessels, but your vessels are going to be inflamed too because you have a shitload of glucose, tons of triglycerides in there. They're very inflamed. Like, you have oxidation going on of all this food that you're eating. So, it's inflammation absolutely is probably one of the biggest issues that you're going to run into when you get way heavier and you're also eating a large amount of food for the long time. So those fasting, like those short little fasting things that you can throw in here and there, that helps with inflammation, right? Days off training always help with inflammation. Inflammation systemically is the issue, right? When we get systemic inflammation throughout the body and it starts causing issues, because then it will start causing other processes to be disrupted, cells like receptors to not be very receptive when we're talking about insulin, right, and glucose. So is there anything else hormonally going on? Not so much. Obviously we know that in a high calorie environment, you're probably not going to have low testosterone levels. You're going to have, like, in terms of hormones, you're going to have higher leptin levels, which that burns more calories. So maybe that's not what you want when you're trying to eat, you're eating so much food. But we generally know like leptin ghrelin balance is going to be pretty normal. Testosterone levels are going to be, if you have disruption in like your sex hormones when you're in a high calorie environment, you have something else going on. You really shouldn't, you know. So inflammation is probably the biggest deterring factor, I think, there at the end of the day.
Awesome. All right, so now we're going to transition to the last thing we got for you here today, Austin. Excuse me. Mini cuts, as you kind of alluded to a little bit earlier. So just in general, is this a strategy that you're going to utilize with yourself and your athletes? And then if so, how frequently are you utilizing it? Is it as a means to improve that partitioning ratio that has maybe gone a little bit south due to an extended massing phase? Can you improve insulin sensitivity with mini cuts? What are your thoughts here?
So there's a couple different there's a couple different scenarios you do the mini cuts. Like you might have the individual that is just got fat and insulin resistant. They got to do something about it, right? So you might have, you may have individuals that their body fat really not too bad, but you notice their partitioning is getting really, really poor. Those two types might have a slightly different type of mini cut. Like the one that needs to lose more fat and is insulin resistant might need a little more extensive intervention there. They might need, it might need to be longer potentially. We might have to be more aggressive or whatever it is. I do have some people that their body fat's not too bad. This was kind of my last cut. My body fat wasn't too bad. I wasn't really too upset about the body fat. I just noticed I didn't like the amount of inflammation. I did not like the insulin resistance that was happening, which was inevitable with the amount of food that I was eating. I knew it was going to happen at some point. So my main goal was improve those things. And I know secondary to that, I'm going to lose a little bit of body fat along the way, right? And that's going to set me up to go back up in food when I'm ready. Now, like a scenario like that, in my situation, depending on how aggressive I want to be, may only be 6 to 8 weeks long, or, person B might need 12 weeks or 10 weeks or whatever it is. Determining the ending point, that's where people are like, well, where do I stop? Well, there's a couple things that I'm going to look at. Well, one, are you regaining partitioning, right? We can monitor blood glucose. That's a great marker. I like to use lab work in people. If I'm going to look at inflammatory markers, I have some, an enhanced person, I might do it more often. In a natural person, I still like to look at lab work because I still like to see, I can look at things like these inflammatory markers. I can also look at, this is one that people hardly look at, is actual insulin levels in the blood. Like not blood glucose levels, but actual insulin levels in the blood. I will run into individuals that let's say we get towards the end of an off-season phase or a surplus phase. Sorry, my cats are like jumping on me. I have, and then I'm like, well, your blood glucose is, I don't know, 95. 95, not great, but it's not. I'm not great.
Cole, is there another train going by?
Damn things.
No, I don't know what's going on right now. Why? Do you hear something?
A little bit.
Yeah, it's the same.
It's not. I think
we're
you're
good.
But
not doing it outside again.
I have them get blood work done, and their insulin levels are through the roof. Well, why is that happening? This is a type of insulin resistance, right? Why is that happening? Well, what's happening is in order to keep those blood glucose levels down, their body's compensating by dumping tons of insulin out of their pancreas, right? Because it's like, oh no, we have to keep up with this demand. So how long does that last? Well, eventually that pancreas isn't going to be able to keep up and by producing enough insulin, and you're going to see blood glucose go up. So sometimes insulin resistance can be masked by hyperinsulinemia, high insulin levels. And that's one that people miss because I think that they use blood glucose levels. Some people will like religiously use blood glucose levels as an end all be all. And then I look at them like, well, you're not partitioning. You're not even getting you're hardly getting pumps in the gym. You're eating 5,000 calories. Like why, and you're gaining body fat, but your blood glucose is still only 88. And like, well, why is my blood glucose looks great? I said, yeah, because your insulin levels are 4 times over the top of the range, So that's one that can kind of disguise it. And that's stuff that I might potentially look at. Are you going to know that without looking at labs? Not really. But still, like if I visibly see those signs, but someone's blood glucose is normal, then I know that's probably what's going on. So we're ready to mini cut. So those, again, two kind of mini cuts there. Duration really just depends on what end result I'm looking for. By the end of it, I want that person, I'm thinking in my head, I want that person to be in a good enough place that we're not going to need a mini cut again in another 8 weeks. Like, are we actually going to be able to have time to stay in a surplus again? So I'm looking at performance in that mini cut too. This isn't a contest prep. We don't need to be contest prep lean. And I also don't want someone to do a mini cut so aggressively that they're losing a bunch of strength. You know what I mean? Like, I just don't see that that's necessary. And I also don't think it's necessary to do a mini cut so long that my natural athlete is their test levels are dropping 300. Mm-hmm. Why am I going to do that in a mini cut? Like, what's the point? I'm going to get them as lean and insulin sensitive as I can while still maintaining relatively good performance and feeling decent, at least, right? Now, if they're hungry, that's fine. That's normal. If they lose a few reps, okay, well, they might have lost 20 pounds, so their leverages aren't that good, right? They don't have that power belly now. So that stuff's okay. But if I'm seeing drastic decreases in strength or like libido or their well-being or their energy, well, maybe we need to either slow this mini cut down or we need to end it. And then, of course, I can look at those other parameters. Like I said, insulin levels, blood glucose. If we're using blood glucose, I should obviously see it improve some, probably. If your blood glucose does not improve or it goes up while you're in a calorie deficit, you're probably way too stressed out. And you're dumping a bunch of, I see it, trust me. I see people in prep that their body's so systemically stressed, they're shredded and their blood glucose is like 105. I'm like, you're stressed. So, but those are kind of the parameters. I mean, like I said, duration really will depend on the scenario. I don't think there's not a lot of people that are going to be able to just do like a 3-week mini cut and get a lot out of it. Yeah, they'll dump some water and inflammation, but I can do aggressive ones. If I know someone loses fat pretty quickly and they don't have a lot to lose and they just need to kind of clean up and improve sensitivity, yeah, we might only do 4 to 6 weeks. I might just go pretty aggressive because I know, like, from a metabolic adaptation standpoint, if I push someone really hard for 4 to 6 weeks, we're not going to create a lot of negative adaptations, right? Like, I'm not that worried about their test levels dropping and all this, their metabolism tanking in 4 weeks of a big deficit. I'm not that worried about it. So we might go fast. If I know they need longer, probably going to have to go a little bit slower. I'm not going to create a massive deficit for someone that needs to lose 30 pounds. You know what I mean? So I think that kind of differentiates the two type of scenarios that you might run into, two major ones.
Yeah, absolutely. And something you briefly mentioned there that I want to expand upon is what is too frequent for mini cuts? So let's look at perhaps a year in duration. How many mini cuts within a year are you just at this point like, okay, you're getting too fat too quickly during your gaining phases. We're not maximizing the surplus here. What's too frequent?
Well, I'm going to look at progress too, right? So if we're doing mini cuts and the ending point for the surplus isn't improving at all ever, then that's maybe not a very good thing, obviously. If it can be hard. The thing about off-season and gaining muscle is it's difficult to see in the short term, right? It's not like unless you're blowing up and you're, unless it's like the guy that gains, 5 or 10 pounds of actual lean tissue in his, in his initial growth phase, you're not going to see 1 or 2 pounds super visibly unless I'm like really going back and looking at photos, right? So what can I look at? Well, we could look at other parameters. For example, what's your body comp look like? Well, if you have the same body comp and you're 10 pounds heavier or 5 pounds heavier, you probably gained a little bit of lean tissue. We could assume you probably gained a little bit of lean tissue, assuming that it's not just, a bunch of extra water on you. But like I said, visibly, if you look pretty similar and you're much heavier, well, you probably gained tissue. So I'm going to want to look for visible improvements. I can also, we could go back to that. We go back to that holding thing too. If I like to see that if someone goes up to 200 pounds and then we drop back down to 185 and then they go back up and the next time they hit 200, they look a little bit better and they feel better and they're assimilating nutrients better. That's good. I like to see that. I like to see that they're probably gaining muscle and their body's probably acclimating to this higher body fat or higher body weight, right? Too frequent. Yeah. I mean, you could come right out and say, I mean, if you're doing 3, 4, 5 mini cuts in a year or something ridiculous, I mean, you're not going to gain any type of tissue. I'm not a fan of doing something cyclical, like 2 weeks in a surplus and 1 week in a deficit. I've seen models like that. I don't like that. I don't think that most people are going to gain much muscle that way. And if they do, it's going to be so slow that you're probably going to lose all motivation and want to quit before you actually notice that much. Off season, mentally sticking to something when you're probably going to only gain like 3 pounds of muscle is already, it's already hard enough to begin with. So I think having parameters and something I can quantify with people and show them, like, look, you're 200 pounds in both of these photos, but you look better in the new photo, right? Like, oh yeah, so I'm gaining muscle, right? So, yeah, I mean, realistically, as long as you aren't doing something super duper crazy and going massive surplus, I mean, you could probably do 1, maybe 2 a year at most. It's probably going to be pretty reasonable, I think. I mean, I don't think, like we said, we already kind of laid out, we're looking at mini cuts, maybe minimum of 3 to 4 weeks at very, very minimum, but probably longer, more like 6, 8, 10, potentially even more if they go really, really, really slow. And it comes down to personal preference too. Some people, you can add, if you take the whole psychological part in there, how fast can people accept weight gain? How fast can they accept deterioration of their body composition? How fast do they want to lose weight? What is their life going on? What's going on in their life? Maybe they don't even have time to do much cardio, so I'm working solely off nutrition and I have to go a little bit slower or something. There's just so many psychological variables, but ideally in a mini cut, I don't want to disrupt our normal flow that much, right? I don't want someone to feel like this is time for they're changing their mindset. This is time for a prep. I got to be super hardcore or whatever. I want them to still go to the gym to progress. I want them to continue to treat everything pretty much the same. The only thing that changes is they're eating a different amount of food. It's not that much. It's not that difficult, right? It's really not anything that you need to change your strategy with a whole lot in terms of psychologically. I hope that answers that question, maybe.
Yeah, for sure. And kind of just going off that psychological component a little further, do you find like any other positive impacts psychologically that a mini cut can provide for yourself or for your athletes, like adhering to a future surplus in the context of abiding by that plan, where maybe initially they just got like super fat right away, right? And their partitioning went to garbage. So, they apply this mini cut and they come out of it, do you find that your athletes are just more able to adhere to the plan after, implementing something such as that?
Yeah, I mean, they don't. A lot of people by the end of the surplus, they're like, Coach, I'm disgusted by the way I look. We need to, you know what I mean? Some people don't care. Some people are just like, yeah, they have that, eat big, bulking mindset. They really don't care. Other people, it's very difficult for them, and that can be one of the things that causes people to never reach very good potential in terms of muscle gain, right? Because they just don't mentally have the fortitude to stay in a surplus when they get a little bit uncomfortable, and they don't look quite like they want to look. Most people aren't going to look super pretty in order to gain any appreciable amount of muscle mass. Like, it's not going to happen. It doesn't matter if you're natural or enhanced. It does not matter. You're just not going to look like you're like, I like these people that are saying you should always be within 10 pounds of stage weight. So, dude, if I was within 10 pounds of stage weight, I would feel horrible all the time. I would feel terrible. I could barely maintain 20 pounds of stage weight and feel normal. You know what I mean? And that's an individual thing on my end. But yeah, of course, psychologically, it can give them a relief from eating so much if that's the case, if they are eating a lot. Sometimes it's nice to feel hungry again a little bit after you've just been miserable with food. No joke. I mean, I wasn't hungry at all forever. And as soon as I started getting hungry again, when I pulled back, I'm like, this is fantastic. I said, I was eating chicken. I'm like, this tastes totally different than it did 2 months ago, So yeah, psychologically, it just gives them some relief from maybe not quite liking their body comp, maybe the high amount of food. It can also just be a little reset psychologically, get them ready to go back up again. There are people, like I said, that they personally, I don't like getting super lean either because it's super uncomfortable. But just because I normally have to go very low calorie, I adapt very hard both directions. But I also really don't like eating 7,000 calories either. It's really awful. So for me, it was a really nice break. I could mentally prepare myself. And it also gave me some time to look at maybe how I could change my food selection perhaps in the next growth phase, or like little things I could do to improve my digestion a little bit more, or how can I make this next one maybe stretch it a little longer than the first one, or whatever. You should always learn stuff, right? I mean, I should always learn things about my clients, and sometimes mini cuts too. If it's someone that I've never worked with, a mini cut's a great opportunity to get a feel for how they lose body fat for when it's time to go into a contest prep. Are you someone that needs to use a smaller surplus or a larger surplus? Do you adapt quickly? Do we maybe need to use refeeding with you? Or, I mean, like, what's the person's physiology like? It's not just take away calories and add calories. I mean, I'm always learning different stuff. Thermodynamics determines ultimately that determines the outcome, but it really doesn't determine anything in between. There's so many other things that I'm going to take into consideration. So yeah, and sometimes it can just be, maybe they just want to eat different foods. Maybe they want to eat, they like vegetables. They want to eat more veggies, but they haven't been eating much because they were eating 900 grams of carbs and they couldn't fit them in their stomach. Like, I mean, there's a lot of little things. There's a lot of little things that you could potentially look forward to, I think. So.
For sure. Hey, man, appreciate your insights today. That's all we have for you. For our listeners that may not know you, what's the best way they can follow you, support you, and learn about what you're up to?
Yeah, they can. So Facebook, Austin Stout, you can find me on there. It'll be some bodybuilder guy posing. Probably not that many of them with my name. So you'll find it pretty easy. Instagram, if you go on my Instagram, my handle is Austin ST8, the number 8. And then there's a link tree in my bio. You can just click the link tree, and that has links to like my podcasts and my YouTube channel, my website, and all that stuff. That's the easiest way. You can find everything right there. Anytime I do seminars or anything, I always have all that stuff in there. So it's all there.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll link your information below in the YouTube video, and we're also going to be up on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Stitcher as well. Austin, thank you again, man. Really appreciated talking to you today. Learned some new stuff, getting the gears turning.
Cool, guys. Right. I hope I provoked some thought.
For sure. All right, guys. We'll catch you on the next episode. Hope you really enjoyed it. Take care.